Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching A+ Essentials, Troubleshooting Operating Systems. This is part of Train Signal Fast Track CBT Video, CompTIA A+. In this video, it's our goal to help you understand the fundamentals of troubleshooting operating systems. To do this, we're going to talk about different troubleshooting techniques, system files, error messages and blue screens, the boot sequence, ASR and ERD, Windows PE and BartPE, recovering from booting errors, booting methods, utilities, and preventative maintenance for the operating system. So we've got a lot of great topics to cover. Before we start with the topics, let's talk about the A+ exam objectives. All right, the A+ exam objectives in bullet 3.3 say that you should be able to identify tools, diagnostic procedures, and troubleshooting techniques for operating systems. Specifically, you should be able to identify basic boot sequences, methods and utilities for recovering operating systems, automated system recovery, and emergency repair disk, the recovery console, and safe mode. You should be able to identify and apply diagnostic procedures and troubleshooting techniques. For example, how to identify the problem by questioning the user and identifying user changes to the computer. How to analyze the problem, including potential causes and initial determination of software or hardware problems. How to test related components, including connections, hardware, software, device manager, and consulting vendor documentation. How to evaluate results and take additional steps if necessary, such as consultation or alternative resource materials. You should also know how to document activities and outcomes. And there's a few more things you need to know. You should be able to recognize and resolve common operational issues such as blue screens, system lockup, input-output device issues, application installation, start or load of Windows-specific printing problems, such as the print spooler, incorrect or incompatible printer driver, explain common error messages and codes, identify names, locations, purposes, and characteristics of operating system utilities. And finally, Objective 3.4, perform preventative maintenance on operating systems, such as applying software updates, service packs, performing scheduled backups, and using restore points. So in this video, we're going to try to cover all these different objectives, and in the technician operating system video number 2, we'll also be covering some of these topics in more detail. All right, so now let's talk about some different troubleshooting techniques. Now, all parts of the computer are dependent on other parts. That's very important. If the RAM isn't working, the computer isn't going to work at all. If the hard drive's gone out, the computer isn't going to keep working. If the operating system's messed up, chances are you're not going to be able to use the computer at all. So all these pieces are very dependent on all the other pieces. So when there's trouble, you have to be careful not to misdiagnose. So if the computer isn't working, it's very easy to say, it's the operating system, or the hard drive must have gone out. But it can be difficult sometimes to determine exactly what it is. Is it really the operating system, or is the hard drive just having some bad sectors? So, for example, let's say that your computer tells you that it's running low on virtual memory. You might think that you need to add more memory to your computer, so you need more hardware. When in reality, your computer may say that it's low on virtual memory because of a misbehaving program that's eating away the RAM. In that case, it isn't hardware. You don't need more RAM, but it's a software issue. It's a misbehaving application. Maybe it's a server and it's some server application, and you just have to set that server to reboot every night, and that might solve the problem. On the other hand, if it's on your desktop PC and you are consistently running low on virtual memory throughout the day, then you maybe need to get an updated version of that program, or just plain not use that program. There are some very poorly written applications out there that can do very bad things to your computer. And that's why people stick to the name brand, higher-end applications, Microsoft Office, McAfee Antivirus, Symantec, Adobe applications. All these well-known applications tend to not have as many problems as perhaps a freeware application that you downloaded from the internet. Now, an important thing to think about is don't troubleshoot through trial and error. Now, this might work fine. It might work out that you just happen upon the problem, but it's much more important when it comes to troubleshooting other people's computers for a living that you have a real methodology. Now, remember our troubleshooting methodology back in our Essentials troubleshooting video? Well, here's a scaled down approach to troubleshooting the operating systems, and this is based on CompTIA. This is actually provided by CompTIA. So first off, identify the problem by questioning the user and identifying user changes to the computer. So have you changed anything lately? Is there something that happened right before this problem occurred? What applications were you using? Were you using the computer at all? Do you remember any sort of upgrades, or has anyone come by and applied any patches? So ask the computer a lot of, or ask the person rather, the user, a lot of questions about the computer. Make sure you try to get out of them what really might have happened before this problem occurred. Next up, analyze the problem, including the potential causes and initial determination of software or hardware problem. So try to get a handle on it. Is it a software problem or is it a hardware problem? I mean, obviously, if the keyboard isn't working, the keys are getting stuck, you have an obvious hardware problem. If the operating system blue screened, well, that may or may not be a hardware or software problem. You just don't know. Typically, the operating system isn't going to blue screen unless there's a misbehaving application that's been installed that didn't come with the operating system, or there's a bad piece of hardware. So you have to take extra time to determine whether it's hardware or software in the case of a blue screen. You can get the error code and you can go try to determine from that what it might be. We're going to talk more about blue screens in a little bit. Next up, it says test related components, including connections, hardware software configurations, device manager, and consulting vendor documentation. So if it's a third-party application and there's some weird error, well, call the vendor and ask them what it means. You know, if you haven't seen it before, if it's not a Windows-specific error, if it's some application error, I would just talk to the vendor. That's why you pay them for support, hopefully. But go through and test the connections. If the PC's having a blue screen and you think that blue screen is caused by the hardware, you know, perhaps you need to go in and reseat the RAM, test all the connections on the hard drive, and you know, just kind of wiggle them and push hard on them. Maybe blow out the computer, clean it out, check to make sure the fan's not all clogged up with dirt and grime. You know, clean up the computer a little bit. Check to see if there's any service packs that might need to be applied. Make sure the computer doesn't have an antivirus or doesn't have a virus. So the next thing you should do is evaluate results and take additional steps if needed, such as consultation, alternate resources, and manuals. So evaluate the results. What's the real error? What step am I going to take, one step at a time, to try to resolve this error? You don't want to just do 20 different things on the computer and then magically it works and you really don't know what it was you did that fixed it. You want to take one step at a time and then try to reproduce the error. That's another thing. See if the error is reproducible. You'll stand a much better chance of resolving an error if you can actually reproduce it. And when I say reproduce it, I mean, you know, I get the application error every time I go to File, then Print, then it says the application crashed. Well, if it does that every time, that's a reproducible error. You can definitely call the vendor and say this is what's going on and see if they can help you with that. Document activities and outcomes. So when you're done, write down what fixed it. A lot of times that information can be put into a knowledge base, and you know, 2 years later when the same problem comes up, you can look in the knowledge base and you'll be like, oh yeah, that's what I did to fix that. Or even better yet, you might have a group of technicians that work with you, and if they all use the same knowledge base, they can look at your documentation and your outcome from when you fixed the problem, and they can use it to fix other people's problems. It's a very powerful tool. So let's talk about an example of this. So in our example, you're walking through the hall at your office. A computer user stops you in the hall and says, hey, Bob, I need your help. I can't print. You go in their office and they say, look, I click print right here. I've clicked it 50 times and my document never comes out of the printer. We'll ask them some questions. Start off with this first bullet right here. Okay, have you ever been able to print? Well, yeah, I print every day. Okay, well, that's good. Has anything happened recently to the printer or anything recently to your computer that might have triggered this? Has anyone been by to do any upgrades? Has anyone come by and worked on the printer lately? Do you know of any problems lately with the printer? Say they say, no, I haven't, heard about anything like that. No problems. Um, Check to see if they can access other things on the network. Can they access their shared files? Can they access the internet? Assuming this is a network printer. Next up, analyze the problem, including potential causes and initial determination of the hardware or software. So, like I was saying, you're analyzing the problem. What could be the potential causes? The network's down, the printer's off, the printer's out of paper, maybe the print server, the print spooler's down, maybe his application's malfunctioning. Can he print from another application? These are all examples of, potential causes for this problem. But try to narrow it down to hardware or software by doing a little testing there. Can you print from another application? Go look at the printer. Is it turned on? Does it have power? Does it have paper? Is it online? Check the print spooler. And that brings us to testing the related components, including connections, hardware, software, device manager, and consulting vendor documentation. So you're doing all these different tests. Can he print from another application? Is his local printing spooler working? Is the network printing spooler working? Can other people print? Can you print from another computer to that same printer? Evaluate the results from all these different tests. Say you determine that, oh, you can print from another application from that same computer and it works just fine. Then you say, oh, perhaps it's a malfunctioning application. This application you just can't seem to print from. So what's the solution? Well, say you reboot the computer, it comes back up, and then like magic, you can print from that application. You've solved the problem. The user's very happy. They don't care anymore about what it took to solve it or what you did or what the problem was even. They're just happy that it's fixed and they're happy to let you go on your merry way. So you go back upstairs, you go back to your desk, and you sit down and you're like, now I need to document the activity and the outcome. So you create an email, you go into a web server, you have a knowledge base, whatever it is you use to document, go in there and document, oh yeah, I was working with application XYZ. That's the finance application they use. Harry, he was trying to print and he couldn't print. He could print from other applications, but not from this application. I rebooted the computer and the problem was solved. So you document this, you put it out on the network, you alert other people that it's there, that hey, this is a potential problem and this is the solution. That way other technicians see it, hopefully, and the next time that technician's walking down the hall and Harry stops them in the hall and asks them to fix the problem, maybe they don't spend the whole afternoon trying to figure it out when you already figured out the solution. Or a year from now, the same thing happens again. You remember what the solution was because you wrote it down, or you can go look it up. Another important thing is maybe this starts happening to everybody in the company. Maybe everybody has to keep rebooting their PC. And so by people documenting this, you can kind of get a consensus of, wow, every finance user using that application has to reboot 3 times a day because they can't print. Man, we need to call the vendor who sold us that software. There's got to be something wrong. So that's just an example of using the proper troubleshooting process, identifying the problem, questioning the user, analyzing the problem, testing the components, evaluating the results, documenting the activity and the outcome. That's the CompTIA recommended troubleshooting process for resolving primarily operating system issues, but it could be any sort of computer issue. All right, now let's talk about the important Windows system booting files. First off, the registry. I can't talk enough about the importance of the registry to Windows. The registry is where all the system configurations are stored, not just for the Windows operating system, but all for all devices and all third-party applications that are installed in Windows. So to edit this registry and view this registry, you use the regedit program, regedit. And if I open that up, over here on the left, these are hives. They're sort of categories that the keys, which are over here on the right, fall into. So each of these keys has a value and represents a piece of the configuration. Now, I recommend that you do not go in here and make any changes to the registry manually unless you have specific instructions on something that you need to accomplish, meaning Microsoft has given you a document that says edit the registry, go to this hive and change this key to this value. If you have that, then and you're willing to, take a risk, of course, by editing the registry, then go ahead. But other than that, I wouldn't go in here and browse around because you could take the chance of, accidentally changing something or messing something up. If the registry gets corrupted, there's a good chance that Windows will not boot. All right, the next one is boot INI. Boot INI allows you to choose the operating system or the operating system with different boot options. So boot INI could be used to multi-boot your computer, meaning you boot into Windows NT and Windows 2000 and Windows XP. So you have 3 different operating systems on the computer. The boot INI is the menu where you select the different operating systems, and then it tells Windows the path to boot up those operating systems. You could also use it to boot the same operating system, but with different options, meaning boot into safe mode or boot with some other option. So let's go take a look at this boot INI. The boot INI is located in the C drive, and it's a hidden file. So I'm going to go in here and choose to show hidden files. Let's also make sure that show hide protected operating system files is unchecked. That would be on by default, and so would do not show hidden files and folders. So to view the boot INI, I have to check this and uncheck that. All right, so now there's this file here called boot. It says that it is a configuration setting file. If I right-click on this and select to open it, it brings it up in Notepad, which is the Windows default text editor. You can see here this is just my default boot INI. Here I have bootloader. I have a timeout, so I have 30 seconds to answer the question as to what operating system I want to use. And then down here I have my choice of operating systems. But really there's only one choice here, and that is Microsoft Windows XP. So let's see if is there any more over here? Yeah, there's a little bit more over here. And then it starts the next line. So that's a boot INI file. And this could be edited manually, but I don't usually recommend that unless there's something specific you need to accomplish, like editing your multi-boot configuration or changing some important option that you cannot change by the graphical configuration tools. So that's the boot INI, and that creates the menu when you turn on your computer if you have multiple operating systems or multiple options to choose from when your Windows system boots up. All right, we talked about boot INI. Next, let's talk about the NT loader, or NTLDR. This is the bootloader, and it won't be found in Vista, but it is in Windows XP. It's located in the root of the active disk partition, and it's what reads the boot INI. If XP is selected, it runs ntdetect.com, then it runs ntoskernel.exe and hal.dll. Then it reads the registry and loads the device drivers. So NTLoader has a lot to do. It's a very important file. Let's go out and find NTLoader. And there it is right there in the root of the C drive, NTLDR, and it says it's a system file. So that's NTLoader. Let's go on to the next one. Now bootsec.dos is used in dual boot configurations, specifically older operating systems. Next is ntdetect.com. This is used to get information about hardware run by NTLoader. Let's go out here and see if ntdetect.com is here. And it is. It's a hidden file. It's in our root directory of the C drive. All right, let's go back. ntbootdd.sys, used to boot Windows from SCSI disk drives. ntoskernel.exe, this is the Windows 2000 or XP operating system kernel. Let's go find this file. We should be able to find this file, ntoskernl.exe. Well, we can easily tell it's not in the root directory, so let's do a search. ntoskernl.exe. And there it is. In C:\Windows/System32, NTOS kernel. That's actually the kind of the core, the kernel, just like a kernel of corn, the kernel of the operating system that is so important and controls so many things in Windows. All right, then there's HAL.dll. This is the hardware abstraction layer. This is a driver library that Windows uses to communicate with hardware. And this is in the Windows system directories. All right, so we already looked at these files along the way. You saw where most of them are located, and hopefully you understand the importance and the purpose of some of these important Windows system booting files. All right, now let's talk about Event Viewer. It's very important to check the Event Viewer. This should be the first thing you do when you have an operating system, hardware, or application issue. When one of my system administrators comes to me and says, hey, we're having a problem with such and such server, I say, oh, did you check the Event Viewer and find out what the error was and look it up on the internet? Or have you looked in the Event Viewer to see what piece of hardware is causing that problem? So the Event Viewer is kind of like the system log. Well, in Windows, it is the equivalent of the system log. It's the only system log. And it contains information about security. For example, who logged on and who logged off, who printed what, who accessed what file or modified what file, if these things are turned on. They're not always turned on. It has information about applications, what applications crashed unexpectedly. It has information about the system. Was there a serious system error that occurred and the system crashed and rebooted? It has a number of other different types of logs that may or may not be there depending on what type of system this is. If it's a Windows Active Directory domain controller, it'll have a specific Event Viewer log just for that, that type of information. So let's go check out the Event Viewer. To go to the Event Viewer, you go to Start, Settings, Control Panel, up to Administrative Tools, and then over to Event Viewer. Now you can access the Event Viewer also from Computer Management, right in here, or sometimes you'll have the Administrative Tools turned on over here inside your program files. It'll be Administrative Tools and you can access the Event Viewer there. So in our case, we're going to go to Control Panel, Administrative Tools, then to Event Viewer. All right, now in my Event Viewer, I have actually 5 logs. Typically, most PCs will only have 3. Most PCs will have an application log, a security log, a system log, and that's it, just those 3. In my case, I have an Intel Extended PC log and an Internet Explorer log. So let's take a look at the defaults, the application, security, and system Event Viewer logs. If I go in here to application, you can see as of today, I've had a number of errors. Well, I shouldn't say number of errors. I've had one error. Notice the error word here with the red X. I've had one warning. Actually, that was yesterday, and so was the error. Those were both yesterday. And I've had a number of, informational events. So informational events basically are just kind of FYI. They're there just so you know, hey, something happened. but red X's with the word error next to them are very important things that you may or may not know about and might lead you to the cause of that problem. So here I had an application error. Let's go in there and see what that was. It says faulting application camrecorder.exe had this fault, and here I can go to this web link and try to look it up and determine what went wrong. So just an example of an application that was misbehaving or crashed, and that's in the application log. Notice how we're in the application log. So if I go into security, I only have one success audit, so I don't have many security events turned on. You have to go in and enable security auditing. So here I have a success audit when this user, me, David Davis, did something, successfully logged on, it looks like. And these logs are pretty cryptic. You can get software out on the internet to help you try to decode these logs a little bit more because they can be very cryptic sometimes. Even to someone who's experienced, looking in here and trying to figure out exactly what all these events are telling you can be kind of challenging. Now let's go to the system log, and to me this is really the most important. The system log has all your system events and tells you what's been going on. So immediately I notice, whoa, there's a big red X right there at the top. Let's go into that. And here we see that the master browser has received a server announcement from this server, and that server believes that they are the master browser for the domain, and a master browser is stopped or an election is being forced. So this has to do with networking. When it says master browser, I just know that from experience. But there's been some sort of network issue. So that might be something to look into. Then there's some informational things here. It says that my wireless network adapter has initiated normal operation. So it's just telling you, hey, things are going good. We have a normal operation. We're connected to the wireless network. Down here, here's a warning. It says the time service has not been able to synchronize the system time for quite a few seconds, and the system clock is unsynchronized, so your clock could be wrong. So it's not a fatal error with a big red X, but it's a warning like, hey, there might be something wrong here. So these are just examples of what is contained in the event viewer. All right, we talked about the event viewer. Now let's move on, and let's talk about error messages. As a technician, you should be familiar with common operating system error messages. Let's look at some of the more common messages, and most of these are taken from the A+ objectives. So I'm just going to start with the first one here and go down the list. First off, if you're booting, that's what this boot means here at the start of all these. If you're booting your computer and you get a message that says invalid boot disk, it may mean that you need to reinstall the operating system. I would also check to make sure there's not a floppy disk in your floppy drive and it's trying to boot from the floppy disk first instead of booting from your hard drive before you go to all the trouble of reinstalling your operating system. Do a little bit of troubleshooting. Is there a CD in the CD drive? Check that out and see before you reinstall your operating system, because that's a lot of work. Next one is when you're booting, it says inaccessible boot drive, and many times you'll get a stop error, a blue screen, and I'll talk about blue screens actually on the next slide, a blue screen with a 7B, and this means you could not load the driver for the boot disk. And these are all things you can go and look up out on the internet. I'm sure many other people have experienced them, and you could get some information from them and try to figure out, well, how do I get around this? What's the best way? With many of these, the standard answer is, oh, just reinstall the operating system. But you don't want to have to go through that every time if there's an easier, quicker way. The next one says you're booting and you get missing NT loader. Well, it says this means you need to, again, reinstall the operating system. But I would double check to see if there's some way to copy the NT loader back onto your boot drive without reinstalling the operating system. Next up, when you're booting and it says ntoskernel.exe is missing or corrupt, commonly this means there is an error in the boot INI file. So what you could do is you could boot using BartPE, and I'll show you BartPE here in a little bit. You could boot up not using your operating system. You could boot from this special CD called BartPE. You could go in and you could view the boot INI, and maybe you had edited it, and you had made a typo in there. And you might be able to fix your typo, reboot, and things are back running again. The next one is you're booting your computer, and you get operating system not found or similar, and commonly this means no operating system files are installed at all, and you need to reinstall the operating system. Well, if you were using your computer and this just happened all of a sudden one time when you rebooted, I would go through some sort of additional troubleshooting again before just reinstalling the operating system. Now, another error is at Windows startup, you get an error that says device or service failed to start. And my piece of advice on this is examine why the service could not start by going to the event viewer. The event viewer is the best place to go learn about why the service couldn't start. Many times it'll even tell you, what you can do to resolve it. Next one is on Windows startup, it says a device or program in the registry is not found. Commonly this means you need to edit or repair the registry. There's some registry repair tools you can download from the internet. Some are free. Some of them you have to pay for. I wouldn't go in and just manually edit the registry unless you know exactly what device or program it was and you have some idea as to how you can fix it. The next one is a Dr. Watson error. Dr. Watson is the Windows error reporter, and it's also the application that takes a dump of the memory. In other words, it copies the memory when the system crashes and it saves it. And this utility was also present in Windows 2000, and it intercepts the program crashes, as I said, takes a memory dump of what happened, and then it may display helpful information to assist in solving the problems. And we're going to talk about error reporting in just a minute, but commonly when you have a system crash, your system will reboot after Dr. Watson takes the memory dump, and it'll tell you a serious system error occurred and ask you if you want to report it to Microsoft and if you want to have them help you, potentially figure out what it was. Next one is the system's locked up. There's no error message, but you have to reboot. What was the cause? Well, these can be very difficult to troubleshoot, unfortunately. If there's no error, the system's just hung, and you have to reboot because the mouse or keyboard doesn't work. I would go in and look at the event viewer and try to figure out, if there was something that happened just before that that might have caused the lockup. Many times in my experience, I've had to end up reinstalling the operating system to see if it was really the operating system that was causing the problem. And in fact, sometimes it was the operating system, and after you reinstall, you don't have any more problems, and you say, hey, it was the operating system. Other times you reinstall the operating system, and the same problem comes right back. In that case, you say, gee, this is a hardware problem, and you might have to replace that computer or replace pieces of the computer, but it can be difficult to figure out what piece it is. There's a blue screen of death. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. And then the last one is when you print. You're printing and the print spooler is stalled. You get an error message about incorrect or incompatible print driver for print, or the wrong printer is selected. There can be a number of different errors on printing, and we'll talk more about printing errors in the troubleshooting section of our printer videos. So I'm not going to cover the printing errors at this time. All right, now let's talk about blue screens. And if someone out there is familiar with blue screens already, you say, oh, blue screen. Just the sound of it, brings pain to your heart. The dreaded blue screen of death, they call it, the BSOD, is a solid screen that appears when the operating system suffered a major crash. A lot of times you'll be doing something on your computer and just boom, blue screen, and everything you did is lost if it wasn't saved prior to the blue screen. It can be very frustrating. Now the blue screen of death will display a stop code. On the top left-hand corner it'll say stop 00000A or something like that, some code. You should note this stop code as it will help you in figuring out why the blue screen of death occurred. Now the BSOD can happen on boot when Windows tries to start or when you're using Windows. Many times the blue screen of death is caused by missing or bad hardware or drivers. Usually it's not the operating system, although people blame the operating system over and over again. Now, if you happen to have a blue screen when the system's booting up, try to use safe mode to see if you can get around some of the drivers that might be starting and get into safe mode and maybe disable some of those drivers. Now, a stop code with a 0D usually indicates a video card issue. Just an FYI. You might have a video card issue because you got a 0D. You go into safe mode. You might be able to get into the computer and use it a little bit, but or maybe you can replace the video drivers by going into safe mode. If not, maybe you replace the video card and then you can reboot and things are working again. Now, at this website I have here, you'll find a long list of stop messages and the resolutions. There's a lot of great information out on the internet about what causes blue screen stop messages. Let me go to this website for just a second and show you what it looks like. So on this website you have all these different stop codes. And over here there's other error messages. So for example, a 0A, I've seen this one before myself, says IRQ not less or equal. Let's click on that. So this is the stop code right here. This is what a stop code looks like. And then there's usually an error after it that says IRQ not less or equal. And it goes on to talk about how this is typically due to a bad driver, faulty or incompatible hardware or software. Use the general troubleshooting of stop messages checklist above, and then it scrolls down and it shows you different links that might give you information as to what is causing this error. So it's a very helpful site, and there's a number of other very helpful sites on the internet when it comes to troubleshooting these blue screen stop codes. Alright, as usual, an excellent resource for resolving Windows issues is the Microsoft Support Knowledge Base. And this is found at this website right here, support.microsoft.com. I'm going to click on that and let's go take a look at this support knowledge base. So this is the search tool for the knowledge base. So what I can do here is I can select the product that's giving me problems. I'll say Windows XP Service Pack 2 and I'll just type in the word blue screen. And if I scroll down here, it tells me all the different articles that contain, the word blue screen. So, for example, here's somebody who had a stop code 7E error message after you upgrade to Windows XP Service Pack 2 on a non-Intel processor-based computer. What do you do about that? Let's click on it and find out. There's the cause. And is there a resolution? There may or may not be a resolution. Don't always count on there being a resolution, or even finding, a explanation as to why you got the error you did. It says most computers include an image that the manufacturer has created using the sysprep tool. Sysprep lets the computer manufacturer generate an image. Basically, this may occur if the original XP System Pack 2 sysprep image is created on an Intel-based computer and then deployed on a non-Intel-based computer. So what's happening is the Intel driver here is loading, but you don't have an Intel computer, and you get this stop error code, and the system crashes. So it's not the fault of Windows, it's the fault of someone who took a Intel-based Windows XP image and put it on a computer that doesn't have an Intel processor. So just an example of how you can get a stop code. You go on the internet, you go to either Microsoft support website or other websites on the internet, you look it up and you find a resolution. Alright, now for entertainment purposes, you can get your own blue screen of death screensaver at this website right here. Maybe you can scare your friends or scare some of your colleagues putting that screensaver on there, and they think, oh my gosh, your system just crashed. Oh no, it's just my screensaver, just for entertainment purposes. So now let me do something to demonstrate what a blue screen of death looks like. So I'm going to go over here to my virtual computer. All right, so I've got my Windows XP system up and running here. And let's say that I'm in my word processor. And I'm typing away. This is my daily report for the TPS system. Today, we had no problems on the network. You're typing away, and all of a sudden, what happens? A blue screen. Just like that. It says a problem has been detected and Windows has been shut down to prevent damage to your computer. And in this case, it says the end user manually generated the crash dump. And then down here, it has a stop error code, stop E2, and it says it's beginning a dump of physical memory. And then it says the physical memory dump is complete. Contact your system administrator or tech support group for further assistance. So this is what a blue screen looks like. It'll have typically it has the stop code up in the top left-hand corner. And then following that, there's a bunch of ugly looking binary stuff that may or may not mean anything to you. And then it says it begins the dump of physical memory and the memory dump is complete and so on. And then if you have it set to automatically reboot, it will automatically reboot. And this system, I turned off automatically reboot or automatic rebooting so that we could see what the blue screen looked like. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this system off and I'm going to restart the system. And once the system's restarted, we can go in and I'll show you what the error reporting looks like, because that's our next slide. And while the system is rebooting, let's go over to the error reporting and talk a little bit about that. Now, a new feature in Windows XP is error reporting. If a program error occurs, Windows will take a memory dump of what the program was trying to do and ask you if you want to report it to Microsoft. If you say yes, information will be gathered and sent to Microsoft. You will then be suggested resolutions, if there are some known resolutions. Now, error reporting can be configured in your computer's advanced properties. If you're using Windows XP and you suffer a blue screen of death upon reboot, it will tell you that your computer stopped unexpectedly and offer to help diagnose the issue. Well, isn't that nice? Actually, in all seriousness, it is very nice. It is a very helpful feature. So let me go over to this computer where we just had our blue screen and we rebooted the computer. I'm going to log back in, and error reporting is going to come up and tell me that your computer had a serious issue. Let's keep our fingers crossed that it works. No, is it not going to tell us we had a serious issue? Not yet. Let's go in and look at our system properties. Startup and recovery section here. See, I turned off the automatic restart. I did turn on write an event to the system log, so there should be an entry in the log file, the event viewer, that tells us that we had a crash. Let's close this out. Let's go into the event viewer and see if there's a message in there. All right, so down here we have a save dump. And here's some system errors. Although these were a little bit ago, let's take a look at one of these. Here's some different error codes. And this is a sign that Windows started up right here. This is a boot of Windows. Uniprocessor free. The event log service was started. And then here it says the computer rebooted from a bug check. So a bug check is a blue screen of death. And it says here that the dump was saved in this dump file. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And I want to cause that blue screen of death one more time. And we'll reboot the computer and we'll come back. And I want to show you that event reporting or error reporting. To me, it's a very cool feature. And let's see if we can recreate it. So I did the blue screen again. I'm going to turn the computer off and I'm going to reboot it. And it may be because we turned off the automatic system reboot that the error reporting is not reporting anymore. So while this is booting up, let's go back and talk on our slides here a little bit more. Let's go on to our next topic about the boot sequence. Since our computer's booting right here, while we wait, we can talk about the boot sequence. That's an appropriate topic. So what is the basic boot sequence? Well, first off, there's the post test or the power on self-test. This is when you turn on the computer and the BIOS is what checks to see if you have your keyboard present, your mouse present, if you have, let's say, a hard drive, RAM, a CPU, all those important things that are required to make the computer work. That's the post test. Then the BIOS looks for the master boot record. This is the place on the hard drive that where the operating system is located, where your primary file system is, your primary partition is located, and then the boot process starts with NT-loader. Then the boot INI is read. If you're using DOS as one of your operating systems, the bootsec.dos is read. If you're using Windows, then you use the ntdetect.com, the ntoskernel.exe, hal.dll. The device drivers are located from this registry key, hkey local machine/system. Then WinLogon, that's your logon process, so you can log on to the computer. And before we answer this question, let's go back here to our computer and let's see if we can get this error reporting working. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Now, why that didn't come up last time, I don't know. But what it says is the system has recovered from a serious issue. It says a log of this error has been created. Please tell Microsoft about this problem. We have created an error report that you can send to help us improve Microsoft Windows. We will treat this report as confidential and anonymous. To see what data the error report contains, click here. All right, let's click there. So here's the crash code and operating system version, and I'm sure some other things that only mean something to Microsoft. It talks about what the error report contains. It says they don't collect your name, address, or email address, or any other personally identifiable information. Here's information on the technical information about the error report. Here's where it's contained and the piece of data that goes with it. And then you can go to their data collection policy. Anyway, if we close that out, if we click here, Send Error Report, it says, in order to report this problem, you must connect to the internet. Please start your connection before continuing. Well, if we have an active internet connection, we can click OK. And, oh, we got the message again. Let's send the error report, and so let's say OK. See if it works. Oh, we didn't get anything back from it, did we? But typically it says it was sent to Microsoft successfully. Now, maybe because our internet connection isn't up on this computer, it didn't tell us anything. But that's error reporting. And that happens not only when the system crashes, but also when individual applications crash. So it can be very helpful to diagnose application issues as well as total system failure, blue screen of death issues. All right, back at our slides, I wanted to answer this last question before we move on. What would you do if your computer won't boot from a CD? And the answer is to check the BIOS boot order. Let's check out the BIOS boot order on this computer. I'm going to power off this computer, and I'm going to power it back on, and I'm going to try to get into the BIOS. F2 to enter setup right there. It was hard to see because I had to press the button really fast before it went into the boot. But what we want to look at here is the boot order. This is our BIOS. So this is what controls the basics of the system, system time, system date, what hard drive it has, how much memory it has, and some more advanced settings. But over here is the boot order. So in this Phoenix BIOS, Phoenix is a very popular brand of BIOS, we have this tab called the boot order. And so first off, we're going to boot, let's make sure we understand the directions over here. We're going to boot removable devices, then the hard drive, and not the CD-ROM. So say you're trying to boot from CD-ROM and it won't boot up. Well, that's because the CD-ROM drive is not selected here, or it's below the hard drive. So the hard drive's being found first. There's the operating system. So the operating system on the hard drive just boots up. You don't get to boot from the CD. So how do you change that? Well, if we read the instructions over here, it says plus and minus moves the device up and down. So I'm going to move the CD-ROM drive up to the top, and that way it'll check the CD-ROM drive first, then removable devices, then hard drives. We'll say I don't need removable devices. We'll move that down. Now, Control-Enter expands all. I'm going to expand all. Okay, so the pluses just meant that there was some information underneath those. So, for example, the hard drive, it says bootable add-in cards, the VMware Virtual IDE hard drive, that's our hard drive, and then removable devices are legacy floppy drives. You can also remove a device from the list if it's not installed. So say I'm going to remove legacy floppy drives by pressing D. Well, it doesn't go away. Anyway, that's not important. You can take devices off the list, you can sort the order, and you can make your CD-ROM drive be at the top. If you're trying to boot from CD-ROM, this is very important. Make sure that you exit the BIOS properly and save your changes. It says, do you want to save configuration changes now? I'll say yes. And we need to exit saving changes. Save configuration changes and exit now. Yes. There we go. We got out of that BIOS. It's a little cryptic to use because you're not using a mouse anymore. You're using up and down arrow and enter and space bar and plus and minus and different keyboard things to get the system to reorder that boot order. And I don't know if you saw there just a second, it said if you want to boot from CD, press the space bar. That's something else you'll need to do is press the space bar. But first, you need to have that CD-ROM drive at the top of your list, or actually before, say, the hard drive, so that the CD-ROM drive is checked first. All right, with that, let's go back to our slides. And we can move on now and talk about ASR and ERD. Now, if your system won't boot, besides having the Windows CD, it's important to have emergency repair disk or startup disk or boot disk. Now, in Windows 2000, you can create 4 boot disk and an emergency repair disk or ERD. Now, to create this, you run makeboot.exe in the boot disk directory on the Windows CD, then create the ERD in the backup program. Sounds pretty complicated, doesn't it? Let me show you how to do this in Windows XP. In Windows XP, it's much more simplified, and they use something called ASR, or Automated System Recovery. This is integrated into the backup utility, and it uses a combination of Windows CD and ERD to recover Windows if it won't boot. So let me show you how this works. To do this, I'm going to go to Start, then up to Programs, Accessories, then to System Tools, then to Backup. says it's looking for backup devices. Then it comes up with this wizard. This is wizard mode, and in wizard mode you have the automated system recovery wizard. It says the ASR preparation wizard helps you create a two-part backup of your system, a floppy disk that has your system settings, and other media that contains a backup of your local system partition. So I'm going to click ASR and just show you a little bit about what this does. And it talks again about what it's going to do. I'll say next. And here it talks about, or it asks for the name of our backup media. It could be a floppy disk, could be a just file on the hard drive. I'm going to take the default. Let me see where it's going to be stored though first. Let's put it on the root of our hard drive on C. And we're just going to call it backup.bkf. I'll say next. And it says you have successfully completed the ASR preparation wizard. When you click finish, the wizard creates a backup of your system files. You'll then be asked to insert a floppy disk. You will use this disk and the backup to restore your system in the event of a major failure. I'll say finish. And at this point it goes through and it builds a list of what it's going to back up. And it starts the backup. And we're not going to sit here and wait through the entire process because it could take a little while. But I just wanted to see or show you exactly how this thing starts out and what you have to tell it and what it does. So it's going through estimating the size of the backup file, so on and so forth. I'm going to say cancel, and I'm going to cancel this out. It says, are you sure you want to cancel the backup? I'll say yes. And here you can get a report. I'm going to say close. But you get the idea of what the ASR does. And then to use it, you would insert the floppy, and then you would use the backup file, which is on your media, hopefully, something you can, access, preferably maybe like a USB drive or something that you could use to restore your system. ASR is built into Windows, so it's free with the operating system. In all honesty, it's probably not the best system recovery tool that you could possibly use. Let me show you BART. There's some really cool things you can do with BART, and it's an amazing tool for any kind of system administrator and especially for troubleshooting. So now let's talk about WinPE and BART. Some excellent solutions are available if your system won't boot. Two of them are WinPE and BartPE. Primarily, I would use BartPE to recover a system. Both are small, standalone, bootable, and functional versions of Windows. So they're standalone on a CD or some other media, but you don't have to do a full installation of Windows. They're everything they boot with, they have programs, and that's all you can do. You can't really add anything once the system's booted, but you have a lot of tools, typically with BART, that you can go in and do just about any sort of system administrator task you need to do to get your system booting again, or do some other task like cloning the system to a image. Now, BartPE is not endorsed or supported by Microsoft. WinPE is an official Microsoft product. The tools needed to make a BartPE installation are free. WinPE 1X is available only to Microsoft OEM partners and Microsoft Software Assurance customers. So most people out in the world today, if they're going to do some sort of bootable standalone Windows version, are using BartPE because it's free. Now, BartPE has unlimited custom plugins, whereas WinPE has a limited range of plugin options. So those plugins are things like Ghost or some other tool that you might use to perform a troubleshooting or administrative task on your Windows system. And BartPE can be found at this website. And I want to point out that BartPE right here is a PE builder, meaning you use this along with your Windows CD to create a bootable CD. You see, the folks who create BART cannot distribute Windows. They can't create and distribute a fully bootable Windows. What they do is they create the tools to help you take your Windows CD that you own and then create a bootable version of Windows. So let me show you what this BART looks like. I'm going to open up my virtual machine, and what I've done is I've put in a BART CD that I've created, and I've set this computer to boot from the CD-ROM drive. We changed the boot order just a minute ago, so when I click Start, I'm going to need to press the space bar, and it says it's inspecting my hardware configuration and it's starting BartPE. So right now we're not booting Windows, although it looks a lot like Windows. We're booting this bootable version of Windows directly from a CD. So it never has to access our hard drive or run anything off of our hard drive, but once it's booted, it's running on this computer, and then we can go access the hard drive. We can go edit our boot INI. We can go modify, configurations on the system, or image the system, or shrink the hard drive, or do all sorts of crazy troubleshooting things that we might need to perform to get the system working again. So in just a second, we'll have BartPE loaded, and I'll show you what it looks like. And it says Windows XP Professional because I use my Windows XP Professional CD to create this BartPE version. I know it takes a minute or so to load, but keep in mind it's loading an entire operating system off of CD that's going to be fully usable with a lot of built-in utilities. And what it did is it resized the screen. Let me see if I can fit it all on. All right, this is BartPE. So down here you have this Go button. It looks kind of weird. It doesn't quite look like Windows. Oh, it's telling us that network support is not started, but you can access the network with this if you configure it. It tells us our number of volumes, our disks, their sizes. If I go to Go down here, I can access programs like VNC, system tools, disk copy. I can check my computer's local hard drive. I've got WordPad, calculator, Paint. I've got Semantic Ghost. I can image this hard drive. I've got remote desktop connection, secure shell, a number of different utilities. I've got a number of system, configuration tools here. I can run my command prompt. And here, right now, I'm on the D drive, which is the CD-ROM drive, but I can go to the C drive, and do a DIR. And there's the virtual C drive. If I CD into Windows, let's exit out of this. And from here we can shut down and reboot. We could do whatever we want to do to this this computer. So let me show you the C drive again, just a second. There's the boot INI. It's on the C drive. So with my text editor here, WordPad, I can open this and I can go edit this boot INI. So maybe I was using it, but I made an error and I made a typo, and now the system won't boot. I can go and I can edit this. All right, and here's my boot INI. So I could go in here and I could fix the error that I made on the local computer's hard drive, even though I wasn't able to boot the local computer. So using the CD, this standalone operating system, I'm able to go in and make changes, troubleshoot, and work on my local computer's hard drive. So it's a very powerful tool. All right, so we talked about WinPE and BartPE. Now let's move on and let's talk about some registry issues. Now the following list of frequent registry issues is taken from a website called Registry Booster. It's found at this link here. I want to give them full credit for this text, these tips. And it starts off by talking about the most common registry problems. There's several problems that may occur within your registry, and they're generally related to registry fragmentation, corruption, unused, missing, or orphaned or obsolete entries. Fragmentation, just like disk fragmentation, may be a serious problem because programs continually and incrementally modify the same values within the registry. The fragmentation can cause some serious issues and make the registry seem slow and make it fail in some cases. And then there's other common registry errors, such as registry integrity, software locations that are missing, orphaned, or broken, bad paths, bad links, unwanted browser objects, corrupt ActiveX, unused or obsolete start menu items, redundant startup applications, orphaned shortcuts, missing applications, residual unused files, file extensions and associations that are unwanted or unused drivers. A lot of things that can happen in this really humongous, complex registry. And there's a lot of applications out there. In fact, this website here sells one. I haven't used it myself, and I'm not recommending it, but it may be a good option. I don't know. There's a lot of good options out there for registry analysis and registry cleanup tools. So with that, we learned about some common registry issues, and let's move on. And now let's talk about recovering from booting errors. How do I recover from booting errors? Well, first off, use the troubleshooting methodology we've learned to narrow down the issue. Is it hardware? Is it software? Is it your operating system? Did the hard drive go out? Is the boot INI corrupted? You know, what's going on? We talked about the common booting errors in another slide. Make sure you have the Windows CD available for operating system issues. Perform a Windows repair, and that can recover your operating system and fix many of the common booting errors by putting back the proper files in the places they need to be. But on the other hand, hardware can always go bad. It might not be an operating system issue. It could be that your hard drive went out. Hard drives are mechanical devices, and sooner or later they're going to fail. Another possibility is that applications and drivers might be added to the operating system, and those are causing the system to not boot successfully. I had a laptop one time that would get to the Windows blue screen right before it was about to say, "Welcome to Windows, please log in," and it would just hang there. It wouldn't let you log in. I restored the operating system from the manufacturer's CD with all the drivers and everything. That fixed the problem, and then a month later the exact same thing happened again. So it's difficult to resolve issues like that. I mean, was it the hardware? Was it the software? Was it applications I installed later after I installed the operating system? It's difficult to say. The clean install is always the best solution to any kind of software problem. If you can do a clean install on the operating system, you're going to be better off than if you had to do some sort of repair, or you had to go in and clean up the registry or something to try to get it to work. On the other hand, a clean install is also the most painful because you're going to lose all your data and your applications if you don't have those backed up, and restoring those back once you do the clean install is also very time consuming, and the applications might not always work, and so on and so forth. So there's good and there's bad to every option. All right, now let's talk about the different booting methods. When you boot Windows, there's a lot of different methods you can use to boot up, actually. You know, many people just boot into regular, normal booting mode of Windows, but there's a lot of different ways to boot Windows. First off, if you have problems, there's safe mode. Safe mode is very helpful because it only loads a limited set of files and drivers. It's in Windows XP in 2000. There's safe mode with networking if you want networking support or need that. There's safe mode with command prompt. You can also enable boot logging. It sends what goes on in the booting process to a file called ntbootlog.txt in the /winnt directory if you're running Windows NT. There's enable VGA mode. There's the last known good configuration that boots up the last time that Windows was successfully loaded. It boots that set of drivers. There's debugging mode. It sends debug to another machine connected via the serial port. There's the recovery console, and I'll show you the recovery console later in this video series. This is where you insert the Windows CD and you use this command series of commands right here to start the recovery console. Then you can boot into a restore point. So let me show you some of these different booting methods. I'm going to turn off this virtual machine. I'm going to eject this CD. Make sure we don't boot off of the CD drive anymore. I'm going to turn on this computer. And I'm going to press, I might have missed it there, F8. You have to be quick. You have to be quick. Let me turn this off. Let's try it one more time. There we go. I pressed F8 and it says select the operating system to start. Well, I only have one choice, and this right here is red from the boot INI. This is my choice of operating systems. Currently there's only one in the boot INI, so it's not going to bring up the boot INI because I have nothing to choose from. But notice down here at the bottom where it says for troubleshooting and advanced startup options for Windows, press F8. I'm going to press F8, and here's my different boot modes. This is just what I was telling you about. I can choose to start Windows normally. I can reboot. I can go into safe mode with networking, safe mode with command prompt, boot logging, VGA mode, last known good configuration. This is where it loads your most recent settings that worked. Hey, that sounds pretty helpful if you can't load up your operating system. There's directory services restore mode, but this is only for Windows domain controllers. And then there's debugging mode. So if I go into safe mode, it's only going to set my resolution to like the lowest usable amount or lowest usable screen area, and it's going to load as few drivers as possible. But it's very helpful for solving operating system or troubleshooting issues. So those are my different methods of booting. I'm going to exit this out. And keep in mind I pressed F8. That's the magic button when your system starts. If you want to choose one of your alternate boot methods, press F8. All right, now let's talk about some common operating system utilities used to troubleshoot Windows. I'm going to go through this list and just hit on all the major utilities, and then later in the video series and the technician part of this series, I'm going to go into exactly how to use these utilities. So this is sort of an introduction to the utilities, and later we'll talk about and I'll show you exactly how to use the different utilities. So the first one is defrag. Defrag is used to defragment your hard drive. This is the command line version of it. There's also a graphical version. There's NT backup. NT backup is the backup program we saw just a minute ago, used to back up your system. It also has the ASR, the Automated System Recovery. There's check disk. Check disk is used to check out your hard drive for errors. It goes through it, checks out your whole hard drive. If there's errors and you use the right flag or the right parameter, it'll fix those errors. There's format. Format your hard drive, format a floppy drive, format a USB drive, whatever it is you need to format. This is your command line utility to do it. Then there's system utilities like Device Manager. I showed you Device Manager. Let me go in real quickly and just show you Device Manager again to refresh your memory. If I go into Computer Management, and here is Device Manager right here. Shows me all my system devices, my network adapters, monitors, hard drives. It shows me what drivers aren't loaded for a device. Like this device here doesn't have a driver. That's Device Manager. There's Task Manager. Task Manager shows you all your running processes. This is Task Manager right here. Shows you your performance and different applications that are running. There's Computer Manager. That's what I showed you right here. This is Computer Manager. Gives you access to a number of different applications. There's regedit, used to edit the registry. There's msconfig. I'll show you that later in the video series. It brings up information about your computer and all your different configuration files. There's Performance Monitor. Performance Monitor gives you graphs on hard drive, application, network, CPU, and RAM utilization. There's System Restore. System Restore is used to take snapshots of your computer's configuration, I should say, essentially the registry, and restore it back to any point that you've taken a snapshot for. We talked about the Event Viewer. We saw that. Then there's Windows Explorer. Windows Explorer is just used to view the files in directories and navigate. So if I open up my computer, this is Windows Explorer right here. I'm inside Windows Explorer. All right, there's Attrib. This is a command utility, a command line utility used to show the attributes of files. Are they hidden? Are they marked read-only? Are they marked archive? There's Extract. Extract is used to extract cab files. These are cabinet files. They're kind of like zip files or compressed files that come with Windows, and Extract is used to get files out of those cabinet files. There's Edit. Edit is a command line utility like Notepad. Edit is a text editor, but it's run at the command line. And there's a lot of other valuable tools and utilities. These are just some of the more common ones. I want to point out that sysinternals, which used to be a standalone company, they're now owned by Microsoft, has a lot of different utilities available at this website. All right, now let's talk about preventative maintenance for your Windows operating system. How do you prevent operating system trouble? Well, here's my list of things to do. First off, you run disk cleanup and disk defrag. You defragment your hard drive and you clean up your temporary files, temporary internet files, and unused applications. That's what disk cleanup does. It's an automated Windows utility. Defragment, of course, is going to defrag your hard drive. You keep your antivirus and anti-spyware software loaded and keep it up to date. You have to get those updates very frequently. I'm talking about every hour, every few hours, to make sure you're not going to get a virus. Use supported hardware that's on the hardware compatibility list, hardware that's in the Windows catalog. Make sure your hardware is supported by your operating system. Use the proper drivers for your applications. Go out and get the latest driver for the application or the hardware, whatever it is that you're using the drivers for. Make sure you have the latest and greatest. Shut down your operating system properly. Go to Start and go to Shut Down. Don't just turn off your computer. And reboot frequently. I already have that down here. Do a daily reboot. Go to Windows Update and make sure you have all the latest operating system patches, both for security and for bug prevention. And you can also use automatic updates, so you don't have to go out to the website. They're just applied automatically while you're sleeping. Use the System Restore on a scheduled basis, and I'll show you System Restore later in the video series. It's used to take snapshots of the configuration of your computer. Make sure you back up your user data on a schedule. You don't want to lose your documents, your spreadsheets, your family photos, all those important things. Make sure you have backups of those. And periodically, I know it's a pain, but once a year I would do a fresh install of your operating system if possible. If you're at that experience level, I would do a fresh install and make sure you start fresh and have a good clean operating system that doesn't have a lot of applications and just junk that builds up over time and overusing an operating system for a long period of time. And with that, we've reached the end of our video on troubleshooting your Windows operating system. In this video, we talked about troubleshooting techniques. We talked about important system files. We talked about error messages and error reporting and blue screens. I showed you what a blue screen looked like, and we talked about some ways to try to troubleshoot those blue screens. We talked about the boot sequence and what it takes to load up your Windows operating system. We saw the ASR, the Automated System Recovery Wizard, and we demonstrated BartPE, a standalone Windows operating system that runs off of a CD. We learned about some steps you can take to recover from booting errors, different booting methods like safe mode, last known good configuration. We learned about different utilities like defrag, check disk, attrib, edit, all those important utilities that someone who's troubleshooting a computer will probably need. Then we learned about preventive maintenance for your operating system. Some of the things you need to do to make sure your computer's performance doesn't degrade over time, and your computer just doesn't break one day. Make sure you have your antivirus software up to date, your security patches up to date, and you're keeping your computer maintained. With that, that's the end of our video on troubleshooting your operating system. This is part of A+ Essentials video series. Thank you very much.